Greetings, ladies and Mendeljets, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, where I take a space-related story from around the internet and read it out loud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Please don't forget to do the usual YouTube gumph, because if you don't, the nanite swarms will steal your other sock. But more importantly, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I'd quickly like to thank the following Tier 5 patrons and channel members for supporting the channel: Datamagnet and Bob the Dragon. Thank you very much. Naked and Afraid, written by Aiass. John returned to his senses with a groan. As far as he could tell, he was lying on the ground, with the mother of all headaches. He tried to open his eyes, but the blinding sunlight shot pain arrows through his eyes, all the way up to his fuzzy-feeling brain. He tried to stand up, but the world was spinning. On his ass would do fine then for now. Where am I? Did I get blasted again last night? He asked himself. Confused, he managed to take a look around him, through squinted eyelids, trying to clear the static in his head, and getting his bearings. He was in a grassy clearing in the middle of a strange-looking forest. His eyes fell onto himself. What the hell? He was naked, like butt naked, and in the middle of nowhere. First thought was that the guys in his crew pranked him. Rolling a bit onto his side, he managed to stand up. Blood raised to his head and made him dizzy again. He stood still for a couple seconds, eyes closed, waiting for the world to stop spinning so damn fast. And he slowly opened them and looked around one more time. The tree 50 yards farther, the grass at his feet. He didn't recognize any of it. "Hello? Is anyone there?" he shouted. No answer came, just some birds that chirped and took flight from the nearest tree, and some critters that screeched somewhere deeper into the woods. Not knowing what to do, he started to look more carefully around the place. He woke up, looking for anything really. For his clothes, for footprints, for tire tracks, for a path, anything. And he found absolutely nothing. The grass was untouched except for his footprints and for his body print. It was like he had been dropped on that spot right from the sky. Seeming that would be the only option, his gaze shifted upwards, and his jaw dropped. There were 2 suns visible. 2! He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was a double vision. He looked up again. Yep, 2 happy yellow suns were shining bright on the peaceful clearing and on one hopelessly confused human. About an hour later, the headache was mostly gone, and his mind was clear. He had thought hard and was pretty sure that he remembered every last of his conscious minutes. He'd been on a merchant ship from Earth to the colony of Acadia. Last thing he remembered was that they were in hyperspace with only about 10 hours left until destination, when something went wrong, and the ship was thrown out of hyperspace lane with all the alarms blaring. After that, darkness. He didn't know what went wrong. He just was an accountant on board. He had no clue about all of that FTL stuff worked, or what could go wrong with it. But he clearly was on an alien planet. There was no wreckage around him, not a scratch on his body, and someone had removed his clothes. If that doesn't say alien abduction, I don't know what will, he mumbled to himself, looking a little more suspicious around him, as if he expected little grey aliens to pop their heads out of the taller grass at any time. Wondering what the hell to do next, he started to go around the clearing, by the edge of the forest looking for paths, tracks. He decided to wait around this clearing for now, and not wander too far. Whoever put him here might return. Maybe they saved him, and hopefully the rest of the crew too, from the fading ship. At least they put him on a planet where he could breathe, and not somewhere like Mars or something. That meant that they wanted him to live, right? But why take his clothes? As he reached the farthest end of the clearing, he heard the faint sound of water gurgling. He followed the sound and found a small creek bubbling through the forest. John approached carefully, then squatted near the water. He tested it with one finger. Seemed like normal water, as far as he could tell. He picked up some into cupped hands and smelled it. It smelled a bit like rotten leaves, but nothing really unpleasant. Took a sip into his mouth and didn't feel anything strange. Even if he was very thirsty, he only had a few sips. He was going to have to wait a few hours. If he was going to feel no ill side effects, he was going to have his fill then. Without even realizing it, he'd entered into surviving mode. Like thinking about water, shelter, fire, and food. So, before he left the creek, he collected some rocks, thinking to make himself a hearth. He returned to the clearing, but he didn't go to where he'd woken up a couple hours earlier. He stayed on the end of the clearing, closer to the forest, and to the little creek. He looked up and tried to see the two suns moved, to see if he should expect nightfall soon. Indeed, both suns seemed to have moved a bit in different directions, but it looked like he still had a lot of daylight left. All right, John, you can do this. You've watched enough survival programs. You've read Robinson Crusoe. You can make it through this. Whatever this is, he mumbled to himself. Search party from Earth is sure to find the ship, or what's left of it. And I'm guessing this planet is somewhere near our crash. Or whatever saved me, or took me, from the ship is probably going to return. I just gotta find myself a Wilson and stop talking to myself. 3 days later, he had progressed somewhat. He had made himself a lean-to at the edge of the forest, under a solid-looking tree, packed it with soft, dry grass and leaves. Made himself some sort of grass skirt to protect his privates from the scratching and the dirt. And he tested some berries and fruits he'd picked from the forest, and so far, they were all edible. The water had been okay too. The night before, he managed to start a fire using 2 pieces of dried wood, just like in the old movie Castaway. And today, he was building himself some tools, or at least he tried. He was at his 10th or 9th attempt at making some sort of blade by chipping the edge of a flat rock the size of his palm. He had not been pleased at all with the results of his last attempt, but his hands already hurt from banging the rocks all day, so this 10th blade will just have to do. Proud of himself, he blazed the sharpened rock and next to the bowler that he made earlier that morning. In the last 3 days, regarding fauna, he'd seen only birds and insects, about 10 species of birds with sizes between a sparrow and a geese. He made the bowler thinking of going hunting for some protein. He could have made himself a spear, but his chances of bagging one of those geese was higher with a bowler. A knotty length of wood completed his arsenal, taking the role of a club. Finishing his project for the day, John stood up, getting ready to go foraging for some berries. He stretched and froze. At the opposite side of the clearing, about 100 yards away, a flock of big birds were exiting the forest. He slowly crouched, careful not to spook them. They were big, actually. They were the biggest birds he'd seen so far, alien planet or not. They looked like Big Bird from Sesame Street and had an affair with an ostrich. Their feathers were mostly grayish, with some more colored ones at the top of their heads. They had 2 long, powerful-looking legs, pear-shaped body, but not really upright, a bit inclined forward. Long neck, but way thicker than the neck of an ostrich. The head and the huge beak looked exactly like that of a shoe-billed stork. They didn't look like they were flying birds. They were too big. He had to admit that they were an impressive sight, an opinion shared by his stomach, which began to grumble at the sight of all the feather-covered protein. John looked at the bowler and the club, looked back at the flock of birds, rubbed his grumbling stomach, and decided to try and hunt one. Still crouching, he grabbed his club in one hand and the bowler in the other, slightly lifting his head above the tall grass to check the flock's movements one more time. After exiting the grass, the birds spread out into the clearing, slowly making their way towards the center, probably grazing, or hunting insects and whatnot. John did a quick count and numbered 11 of them, with that seemed to be an alpha male in the middle of them. John checked the wind's direction. It was blowing from left to right. Keeping low to the ground, he slipped into the forest and began to run as quiet as he could, circling to the right of the birds. His intention was to use the cover of the forest and flank the birds from downwind. He hoped to bring down the bird furthest on the right and scare the rest. If the birds proved too tough, he would dash back into the forest using the trees and bushes as cover. 5 minutes later, he was on their right flank, watching them from the cover of the lost trees. The birds were slowly walking, spread out almost in a row, and they were near the middle of the clearing. "Let's do this," thought John to himself. He lowered himself and slipped through the grass towards the closest of the birds. When he was about 10 paces away, he stood up slowly and started swinging the bowler. The bird heard him and turned its head towards him with a surprised croak. It didn't explode into a run, as any bird on Earth would, when surprised by anything. "They probably don't have any predators or hunters to run from," thought John, and released the bowler with a powerful swing. The weapon hit the alarm bird and wrapped around its neck. The bird managed to squawk once and dropped to the ground. Its feathered wings, which had small talons at one of their joints, were pointlessly trying to get the bowler off. As the other birds turned towards him in a surprise and alarm, John yelled like a madman and started to run towards his victim, waving his club around and trying to scare away the rest of the flock. "Shoo! Shoo, you overgrown turkey! Shoo!" The closest 3 or 4 birds began to run away from him in a confused panic. But the big one in the center, the alpha of the flock, released an angry screech, stopping them in their tracks. The alpha lowered its nasty-looking beak and began to run to the aid of the fallen mate. "God damn it," thought John. "Big bird got balls." He considered his initial thought of retreating to the forest, but he didn't want to leave his catch to slowly die of suffocation. It was his duty to put it out of its misery. He was also very, very hungry, so he faced the charging alpha, gripping his club in both hands. When the alpha was about 2 yards away, it leapt at him with its legs and its corresponding talons forward. John stepped to the left, swinging his club as Big Bird flew past him. He hit it in its extended legs, and the bird landed nasty with a screech of pain. John leapt to it and swung his club again, straight at its head, putting an end to its anguish. He then turned towards the rest of the flock and screamed at them again. This time, seeing their leader killed, the other birds broke into a panic and fled. Breathing relieved, John returned to the bird with the bowler around its neck. It was almost passed out. He lowered himself next to it, put one knee on its neck, and grabbed hold with both hands in the bird's head and beak. With a sudden and powerful upward twist, broke its neck and killed it. Aboard the cruiser Steel Talon, the War Council of the Lbry was watching in horrified silence as a satellite live feed from the planet below. The planet's designation was Special Forces Training Facility. It was here that they would test their tactics, improved their performance of their troops, organized war games, and where they researched how other species fought, before engaging in a war against them. When they discovered the humans, they didn't initiate contact. They observed and studied them, looking for weaknesses. They managed to capture one specimen from a commercial ship and dropped it into the training planet. After observing it for a couple days to see what the human eats and how it behaves, its sleeping cycle, and so on, a special forces squad was sent to sharpen their talents and skills by hunting the human. If the reports from the first days had been rather boring, the last hour of live feed had been something straight out of a nightmare. The human took everyone by surprise by attacking the elite squad of Lbry warriors. Nobody expected that. They were expecting it to run, maybe put up a fight when cornered. But for him to attack an entire squad by himself? Madness. When the first warrior went down by a strange crafted weapon of the human, it was almost excusable. You could blame it on the surprise of the attack. When the brave squad leader stopped his panicking flockmates and bravely charged the alien, every member of the War Council watching the feed puffed up his feathers with pride and admiration. But the swift and ugly death that followed put them all in a state of shock. And the scenes that followed wouldn't allow them to exit that state. The cold-blooded execution of the first-down warrior, a prisoner of war by any rules, sent chills down to the top of their chests, down their tail feathers. The satellite feed didn't have sound, but when the human broke the warrior's neck with its bare hands, everyone heard in their heads an ugly crunch as the warrior's spine. After that, they watched in horror as the human carried both fallen troops back to his camp and began to pluck all the feathers from their still, warm bodies. Why would he desecrate the corpses like that? Asked the young captain in disbelief. He already won. He killed them. There is nothing more for him to gain from torturing their bodies. The horrors did not stop there. After the corpses had been thoroughly plucked, they watched as the human picked up a sharpened rock and slit their bellies and began gutting them. There were very few members in the council that did not vomit when the human put his paws up to his elbow into the fallen troops and began yanking out their guts. Every one of the members of the War Council wanted to stop looking, to stop the satellite feed. But it was their duty to watch, to be prepared for the horrors that a war with humans could mean. They owed it to the two fallen soldiers to watch their desecration until the end. And so they watched. They watched how the human hastily built some sort of rack from a few branches, and then began cutting the flesh from the dead troops. You couldn't tell them apart now, into thin strips, and setting them onto the rack, one strip after another. The actions of the humans were beyond their power of comprehension. After finishing his gruesome task of stripping the flesh from one of the cadavers, the human started a fire. When he first had managed to start a fire 2 days ago by rubbing some pieces of wood together, the body had been impressed. Now they were numb with pain and were just wondering, with a sick fascination, what would the barbaric creature do next? The human made 2 holes in the ground on the sides of the hearth and wedged a piece of wood into each hole, fixing them to stand upright. Then he sharpened a longer straight branch at the end, and then not even a single member of the council was able to keep his face during this big screen. They all turned and lowered their heads, some heaving heavily, as the human plunged the sharpened pole into the backside of the second corpse, and pushed and hammered it in until the sharp end extended through the neck of the corpse. He pushed some more until a good length of the bloodied wood was visible on both sides. With a heave, he placed the pole on the impaled trooper over the burning fire, with the ends of the poles suspended on the upright pieces of wood planted on either side of the fire. The silence in the War Council was heavy. The air was thick, with the smell of puke from the bari that didn't make it to the facilities and had vomited right there. They were staring with blank eyes at the horror on the screen. Nobody had the power to even move anymore. They stood like that for more than half an hour, in silence. Thankfully, the human seemed to have finished his horrific spree, and was now sitting calmly by the fire, adding pieces of wood on it from time to time, and sometimes rotating the gruesome pole. General Conk, a veteran of many wars, managed to find the strength to croak meekly. Perhaps the beast has finally sated his thirst for revenge, and this is a, funeral pyre. The rest of his words died in his throat as the human reached for a sharpened stone, and, with lustful eyes and trembling, impatient hands, cut a piece of the corpse and put it in his mouth. The senior general reached for a remote and mercifully shut down the screen. They all stood frozen for a few minutes. "This is madness! I will not send even one of my soldiers against that! I have never seen such cruelty in the universe. War against this species is out of the question. We will continue to avoid them, and inform all other races that we are in contact with to avoid them too. The recording of these events must be sealed and never shown to the public or our troops." The words of the senior general were met with a mute but unanimous agreement. The decision to avoid humans lifted some of the heaviness from the room. It was until the big screen came back online, on its own, but this time it was not a satellite feed, but the screen was filled with the image of an angry human in a military-looking outfit. "This is Admiral Colgane of the battleship HMS, the Hound. May I ask, in the name of what in the Almighty did you have in mind when you attacked one of our merchant ships?" End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.